you've carefully constructed was never you? What if it was all rehearsal? Practice for a life that hasn't even begun yet. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, whose insights still echo through the corridors of modern psychology, once suggested something radical, that the first 40 years of life are not the real journey. They are merely a preparation, a crafting of the mask, a necessary illusion, and what lies beyond, past the halfway mark, is where the true work begins. But if that's the case, why does no one tell you this? Why does the world celebrate the first half as the pinnacle, career peaks, marriages, mortgages, milestones, while the second half is spoken of in hushed tones of decline, crisis, or midlife madness? Could it be that society fears what comes next? Not because it is lesser, but because it is too real? Because it threatens the fragile scaffolding of everything we've been taught to believe about identity, purpose, and worth? You see, Jung believed that the first part of life is about adaptation, fitting in, becoming someone who can function in the world. We become what our parents want us to be, what school trains us to be, what society applauds. We build the persona, a mask so convincing we begin to think it is us. But what happens when the mask no longer fits? What happens when the applause dies down and you're left alone in a quiet room with the echo of your own soul? Have you ever felt it? That subtle sense of unease, like the life you've worked so hard to build is somehow hollow? Like there's a missing piece and no promotion, no relationship, no amount of money can fill it? Maybe it shows up as a restlessness, a longing, a vague dissatisfaction you can't explain. You have what you thought you wanted, and yet something aches. That ache, Jung would say, is the soul knocking. Not gently, not politely, but urgently, demanding your attention. It is the signal that the second journey is beginning. A journey not of becoming someone, but of unbecoming everything you never truly were. But are you ready to listen? Ready to step off the well-paved road and into the wilderness of your own psyche? Because the second half of life asks something terrifying. To dismantle the self you spent decades constructing, and in that dismantling, to uncover something raw, something ancient, something real. What if your so-called midlife crisis isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough? What if it's your soul's rebellion against a life lived in exile from your truth? And what if everything you've endured, the pain, the confusion, the disillusionment, was never punishment, but preparation? The signs are subtle at first. A job you once loved feels lifeless. Friendships you cherished begin to fade. You look in the mirror and see someone you don't recognize. It's terrifying, but it's also sacred. Because the descent into this inner questioning is not the end. It's the threshold, the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, and it cannot begin until the old self begins to crack. So the question hangs in the air, heavy and unavoidable. If everything up to now has been the prelude, then what is the real symphony? And are you willing to hear it, even if it means unlearning everything you thought was true? Because beyond the mask, beyond the noise, beyond the life you were taught to want, there is something waiting, something wild, something you. But to find it, you must first step into the silence where the persona dies and the soul begins to speak. From the moment you were born, the world began sculpting you. Your name was given, your gender assigned, expectations pressed into your soft, forming psyche like fingerprints into clay. You learned to smile when praised, to shrink when scolded. Slowly, unconsciously, you built a self, a version of you that could survive, belong, and be loved. But it was not you. It was a construction, a vessel made to please the external world. Carl Jung called this the persona, a necessary mask worn to navigate the collective theater of society. Without it, we'd be unfiltered chaos. But with it, something precious is hidden, the authentic self, the one buried beneath layers of performance and protection. Jung did not condemn the persona. He understood its necessity. In fact, he saw the first half of life as devoted to its creation. The ego must be formed before it can be transcended. A house must exist before one can renovate it. But the problem arises when we forget it's a mask, when the adaptation becomes identification, when survival becomes substitution. You mistake the role for the soul, and the longer you wear it, the heavier it becomes. That weight? It's not aging. It's the soul suffocating under decades of pretense. But why does this happen to everyone? Why is there almost no escape from this psychological conditioning? To answer that, we must reach deeper, into the roots of society, philosophy, and the architecture of consciousness itself. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned that most people never live. They merely obey. He called this herd morality, a form of psychic imprisonment disguised as virtue. From a young age, you're taught what to value: success, productivity, beauty, control. You're told what emotions are acceptable, what dreams are reasonable, what fears to hide. Even your rebellion is commodified. Tattoos, fashion trends, curated nonconformity. So you mistake noise for identity, busyness for purpose, consumption for freedom. But behind the curtain, the same system remains intact. Don't ask the deeper questions. Don't look behind the mask. Keep playing the part. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that life is suffering, not because it's cruel, but because of our relentless desire to control it. We chase what we believe will fulfill us: status, relationships, recognition, only to discover that every fulfilled desire births another. An endless cycle of grasping that never touches the soul. And herein lies the trap. If your identity is built upon chasing the world's approval, then who are you when the world turns away? When the applause fades and you're left with silence? That silence, Jung insisted, is not emptiness. It's the doorway to the unconscious. The first half of life is solar, outward-facing, achievement-driven. Not mere self-improvement or personal growth, but a radical confrontation with the unconscious. It's the lifelong quest to become who you truly are, not who you were told to be. And it begins, paradoxically, when the persona begins to fail. That moment of collapse, when the strategies no longer work, when the roles feel hollow, is not the end. It's the beginning. The psyche, tired of maintaining a false identity, begins its rebellion. And it speaks through dreams, anxiety, restlessness, longing, not to torment you, but to awaken you, to call you inward. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with meaning, we create it. But what if the soul disagrees? What if there is something deeper than choice, an inner blueprint, a destiny written in the language of archetypes and dreams? Jung believed the unconscious holds a deeper intelligence, that beneath your conditioned self lies a hidden wholeness. Fragmented, yes, but alive. And to retrieve it, you must face the parts of you you've buried. The shadow, the wounded child, the repressed rage, the denied desires. This is the true work of the second half, not building more, but remembering more, not becoming someone else, but becoming more of yourself. But why now? Why does this shift often occur around midlife? Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Holocaust and father of logotherapy, observed that man's deepest drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. And meaning, he said, often arises in suffering. Midlife, with its subtle losses and existential questioning, becomes fertile ground for this search. It is when the distractions begin to lose their flavor, when time reveals its limits, when you start asking, not what do I want to do, but why am I here at all? This is not a crisis. It is a calling, a sacred initiation hidden in the language of confusion, a spiritual hunger wrapped in the appearance of fatigue. And the deeper question now begins to emerge. Not just, who am I? But who was I before the world told me who to be? And am I brave enough to find out? You wake up one morning and the world looks the same, but something inside you has shifted. The job you once poured your identity into feels like a performance. The conversations that used to excite you now feel scripted. Even your own reflection stares back like a stranger. Familiar features, unfamiliar soul. It's subtle at first. A sigh here, a hesitation there. You brush it off. Maybe you're just tired. But the feeling lingers, grows. What once felt like stability now feels like a trap. You begin to question the life you've built, not because it's broken, but because you're breaking out of it. And yet, you can't explain it. Everything appears fine on the outside, but inside, something sacred is unraveling, something that cannot be reversed. This is the silent crisis no one speaks of, not the flashy kind, with tears and theatrics. This one is quiet, inward, invisible to the untrained eye. It's the soul shedding everything that isn't true. But the world doesn't recognize this process. It calls it burnout, mood swings, a phase. So you try to fix it. You distract, you numb, you double down on the old strategies. But they don't work. Because the issue isn't outside, it's within. The self you built is no longer sufficient to hold the truth trying to emerge. And resisting it only deepens the pain. Jung warned that if we do not consciously confront the unconscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. That's the danger of ignoring this inner shift. When you fail to listen to the soul, it speaks louder through crisis, illness, failed relationships, spiritual numbness, not as punishment, but as a summons. Every unhealed wound begins to surface. Every false identity starts to crumble. This is the shadow, the repressed, denied parts of yourself, returning for integration, not to destroy you, but to make you whole. But wholeness is messy. It requires undoing the neat boxes you've packed your soul into. It means facing the parts of yourself you've spent decades avoiding. Modern life leaves little room for this kind of inner reckoning. Our culture is addicted to forward motion, to progress, to achievement. We're taught to produce, optimize, hustle. But the soul doesn't move in straight lines. It spirals, it retreats, it descends into darkness before it rises. And if you try to bypass this descent, you forfeit the wisdom it offers. Aldous Huxley once wrote that most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. We take our roles, our routines, our beliefs as truths, never questioning their origins. But when the soul awakens, it dismantles those illusions. It forces you to see the scaffolding, to question the script. And that can be terrifying. You may find yourself grieving, not just for lost time or lost dreams, but for a version of you that never really existed. You mourn the person you were supposed to be. the life you were conditioned to want, the dream that was never really yours. And in that grief, a strange freedom emerges. You begin to realize that the breakdown is not a failure. It's a release, a cleansing, a burning down of the false to make room for the real. But that truth doesn't come easy. It demands everything: your ego, your attachments, your illusions. This is the price of awakening, and most people are too afraid to pay it. But there are consequences for staying asleep, for clinging to the persona. You begin to live a ghost life, a shadow of yourself. Your passion dims. Your relationships become transactional. Your body carries the weight of unexpressed truth. Jung believed that unlived life doesn't disappear. It festers in the unconscious, erupting later as neurosis, depression, or dis-ease. You think you're avoiding discomfort, but you're really postponing your own aliveness, because there is no bypassing the soul's call. You can only delay it. And the longer you wait, the more disruptive its return becomes. We live in a world that celebrates construction. Build more, earn more, become more. But what if real growth begins with deconstruction? What if the true journey is not forward, but inward? Not becoming someone new, but unearthing the one you've always been beneath the rubble of conditioning? The unseen consequence of a life built on adaptation is this: you may succeed by the world's standards and still feel hollow. You may have everything, yet feel like nothing, because the persona was never meant to fulfill you. It was only meant to protect you until you were strong enough to live without it. So here you are, the old life cracking, the new life unclear, suspended between two selves, one fading, one forming. It is not a comfortable place, but it is a holy one, because this is the space where transformation begins, where illusions die and authenticity is born. But will you embrace it? Will you descend into the shadows, not to escape, but to retrieve your soul? Or will you go back to sleep, hoping the ache will pass? The choice is yours. But know this: the longer you ignore what is stirring inside you, the more relentless it becomes. Because what's calling you is not just purpose, it's truth. And truth will not be silenced forever. You try to return to the life you once knew, but something inside refuses. The routines still function. The roles still fit on the surface. But within, it feels like wearing a costume stitched together by someone else. Conversations begin to feel like echoes, not exchanges. Achievements, once intoxicating, now taste hollow. There's an emptiness that success can't fill. And slowly, the terrifying question arises: what if I built my entire life on the wrong foundation? Not because you were foolish, but because you were unconscious. You did what everyone does. You played the game you were handed. And now, for the first time, you see it for what it is: a performance you never auditioned for. This is the cost of waking up. You lose the comfort of illusion. You begin to see how your deepest beliefs about love, worth, purpose were never truly yours. They were inherited from parents who projected their fears, from schools that rewarded obedience, from cultures that punished authenticity. You didn't choose this life. It was chosen for you. And the more you see, the more the world begins to lose its spell. Billboards scream promises that no longer move you. Conversations feel rehearsed. Social media, once hypnotic, becomes absurd. You're no longer seduced by what everyone is chasing. Not because you've transcended it, but because you've seen through it. Cognitive science tells us the brain filters reality. It selects what fits the narrative you've been conditioned to believe. So if you've spent your life believing that your value comes from achievement, your mind will filter out any evidence to the contrary. But when that narrative collapses, your perception shifts. You start noticing what you once ignored. The stillness between moments, the ache behind the laughter, the silent yearning in your own chest. You begin to feel again, after years of emotional anesthesia. But that flood of feeling isn't always joy. Often it's grief, regret, a longing you can't name. Because you're not just awakening to who you are. You're awakening to what you lost along the way. You see how you've dimmed your light to avoid rejection. How you've silenced your truth to keep the peace. How your relationships were built on roles, not realness. The unseen consequence of all this adaptation is a soul that has been whispering beneath the noise, begging to be heard. And now, those whispers are no longer soft. They are screams. You feel it in your chest. The tightness, the disconnection, the quiet despair that no one talks about. It's not a mental illness. It's not burnout. It's not a random phase. It is your inner self demanding resurrection. Neurologically, this moment is profound. Studies in adult development show that midlife, often seen as a plateau, is actually a neurological threshold, a point where the brain becomes more open to integration